Well, we are going to look at one of my favorite people in the Bible today. So that's just a warning, because that means I'll get enthusiastic, like more enthusiastic than I normally am. And actually, we looked at her. Well, let me think. It was probably last November or December. She was in the 4 series of the Faithful Four. And so if it sounds familiar to you, it's because I think we looked at her back around November last year. So, but that doesn't stop me from going back and talking about her all the time. And in fact, what you'll see today in her story is a story of remarkable grace, dimensions of God's grace in our lives. And in the telling of this story, you'll see something about the remarkable depth of the grace of God. And it reminded me, you know Ephesians 2:8-9, right? Well, right before Ephesians 2:8-9 is verse 7, and he says a remarkable thing. Actually starts at 6. He says, "By grace you've been saved," okay, and he's raised us up with him and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ. And here's his reason why: so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness toward us. You know what that means? That means that in heaven, he's going to point to us one at a time, perhaps, and maybe especially to her, and say, "Let me tell you about the dimensions of my grace. Listen to her story. Listen to his story." See, that's what he's saying. Seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the ages, the coming ages, he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness toward us. And so you get a sneak peek on that storytelling time in heaven. You're going to see her story told today, and you'll see the immensity of God's grace toward us. Okay, we haven't done any geography for a while, so we're starting off way up in space, almost at the satellite level in space. And we're going to come down to where our story is today. So here we are hovering. That green thing on the left, that's the Nile Delta right there at the top of Egypt. The yellow thing I just filled in, that's Israel, today's boundary in Israel. And to the far right is Syria. To the top of the screen is Turkey and stuff like that. Lebanon, we're going to go to Lebanon today, so that's why I highlight that. That's the present day extent of the country of Lebanon. And as we kind of come down over, we're going to hover just a little bit over the Dead Sea, which is this dark streak at the bottom here. The Jordan River comes up from the Sea of Galilee on top. And before we get to where we're going to go finally today, if you look up at the top of the screen, you'll see the bottom edge of Turkey, which actually is the Riviera coast of Turkey. You didn't know there was one, did you? And then just below that island is Cyprus right there. And so as we curl around, we're not actually in the south. We're over the very arid regions down here. We're going to come up around to the Sea of Galilee, because Jesus has been doing ministry in the Sea of Galilee, that whole region around there, and he's going to continue to do that today. We come up the Jordan River Valley, and so the Jordan River flows out south of the Sea of Galilee. It actually flows in from the north as well, from the mountains of Mount Hermon. And the yellow that you see right here is present-day boundary of Israel. However, all the yellow that you see to the right of the Sea of Galilee was taken from Syria in the Six-Day War in 1967. And they kept it as a buffer zone in order that if a tank assault came from Syria, they'd be able to see it and defend against it. Okay, so here's the Sea of Galilee. Remember, you think of it as a clock face. And if you go to the clock face at about 10 o'clock, we were in Gennesaret last week, arguing with all the leaders of the Pharisees. Today, he's going to take a 2-day walk. He's going to come from 700 feet below sea level. He's going to climb at least to about 1,200 to 1,500 feet in elevation, come down to the coast, and then he's going to take the coastal road up into a region in present-day Lebanon. And in the passage, it says, in the region of Tyre and Sidon. So Tyre is on this little point right here. It's a little peninsula that comes out today. You can see it today. And Sidon is really far to the north down here. So somewhere along this path, in the region of Tyre and Sidon, that's where we're going. So Jesus is clearly going way out of his way. He's been spending his time in Galilee, in the northern part of the country, and now he's going up into very, very Gentile areas. Very Gentile areas. And actually, as we take a look at the passage, we'll see that his motivation is crowd control. because it's been so successful in Galilee. I mean, there have been so many people. Remember, we had the feeding of the 5,000, all that kind of stuff. It's actually becoming a problem. So I'll only say half of his motivation is crowd control, to get away from the people. Half of his motivation is also to get away from the Pharisees for a while, because the last time we saw them, they had found him in the north. The Pharisees themselves had walked 2 days north of Jerusalem to come up and confront Jesus in Galilee to find out what he's doing. Here, as he goes up into this very Gentile area, they most likely will not follow him. So again, it's isolating himself from the Pharisees, from that conflict, because he's just maybe half a year from the massive conflict with the Pharisees in the south that's going to result in his crucifixion. So it's kind of a little R&R up in this area. But also, it's an opportunity to spread the gospel in a non-traditional place. Not with Jews, but with Gentiles. And his first foray into that is this woman we'll see today. So let's just pick up the story and see what it says. Here we are, scene 1 out of 3 scenes today. We're in Mark 7:24. So from there, meaning Gennesaret, which is on the Sea of Galilee, from there he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Some of the older translations don't actually have Sidon in the passage. It just says the region of Tyre. So we're talking somewhere in the region of Tyre, means Tyre in north, somewhere there. This is the Lebanon coast. And actually, as you look at this Lebanese coast right here, it turns out that it's composed ethnically of people who are part Phoenician. You remember the Phoenicians? I don't know if you remember Phoenicians from junior high. I didn't hear about the Phoenicians. Phoenicians, they were a group of people who lived all around the edge of the Mediterranean, and they made their income by shipping. So they were the experts on using boats in the Mediterranean. And so they occupied all the shorelines around the entire Mediterranean. So if you wanted to have something you made in your area shipped to another place, you'd find the Phoenician dudes who sat on the coast with their boats. You make a deal with them and they would take your stuff away. Well, this coastal part of Lebanon is very Phoenician, ethnically speaking, people who did boats. But then from the inland part to the left over here, eastward from this area that's north of the Sea of Galilee, when you go on that side, is Syrian. Even today, Damascus, Syria, is in the picture. It's just off to the left up here, Damascus, Syria. So that whole region is Syria. Well, that Syrian area also ethnically, they end up kind of pushing toward the coast. So right at this mountain range, and it's a serious mountain range here on the coast in Lebanon, the Syrians are classically on the eastern side. The Phoenician ethnically are on the western side. So when you would talk about this area, they merged at the coast and you'd have part Syrian, part Phoenician. That'll be important in just a second here. Okay. It says when he got up there and he entered a house and did not want anyone to know. See, it's crowd control. It's R&R time. He found a house. They said, come in and stay. He goes, great, don't tell anybody I'm here. And how'd that work out for him? Not well. He could not be hidden. You can't hide Jesus. Immediately, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Ah, okay. And then Mark goes on and says, now this woman was a Gentile, a Syro-Phoenician by birth. So she's a Gentile. That's the generic thing. She's not Jewish at all. But she's a Syro-Phoenician. And, every time I've read this, I thought, Syrophoenician, that is one heck of a $10 fancy academic word. So I went back in the Greek to find out what it says in the Greek. You know what it says in the Greek? Literally, phonetically, Syrophoenician. That's what it is in Greek. So when Mark wrote this, he was being very specific. The woman who's here is half Syrian, Syro, half Phoenician. She's half inland, half coastal Lebanese. That's what we would say today. So she's a Gentile and a Syrophoenician by birth. So now Jesus has gone up to get a little R&R, found a little house, an Airbnb. He's in there and says, don't tell me anyone that. Don't say I'm here. She finds out he's there, and immediately she makes a beeline to him because she has a daughter who has this demon problem. Falls at his feet. Now, when you read Matthew's gospel, and I'm going to interlace a little bit of Matthew's gospel because he's a tiny bit more verbose about what goes on here. You remember, when Mark captures his gospel, it's very tidy and concise. Right? And so there's details that are left out. The stories are complete, but there's other details that if you spend the time to look at Matthew, Luke, and John, you'll see more detail. Matthew has a lot of details here. In capturing who this woman ethnically was, because this is important to what will happen next, he says she's a Canaanite woman from that region. Well, that's accurate too. So the Canaanite always was the generic term for the peoples who lived in the promised land before Israel went there. And they were also, the Canaanites, the residents, pre-Israel residents there, were also the ones who'd had their sinfulness blossom into horrible stuff. Basically, God said, we got to let their sinfulness, their evil, bloom into full bloom before we bring Israel back in there. That's the Canaanite. So when you see the word Canaanite, think about the classic, oldest enemies of the Jews. They were the ones that when Joshua went into the land, God said, wipe them all out. Wipe them all out. But he didn't do it completely. And so here's a woman who's still left over from the pre-Exodus days, Canaanite. So right here, when you get these three words, Mark and Matthew are both trying to make an extraordinarily powerful point. This woman is not only the classic oldest enemy of Israel, but she's Syrian, another classic enemy, and Phoenician, the guys, the shysters who actually took your money to transport stuff around and got rich off of you. So this is like, in every sense of the term, she is a bad person for Israel. She's from those people. But she's the one that comes out running to Jesus. And now why would she ever think that in any way possible he might actually receive her? Because she is from ethnically the oldest enemies of the Jews. In fact, the Jews had a shorthand way. Instead of saying all this kind of stuff, I mean, that's a lot of stuff to say to describe these people. Instead, the Jews had a shorthand way of talking about this way. You know what they called them? Dogs. It's a lot easier to say. So when you're talking about these people, the Jews would call them dogs. So what they would say if someone was describing what Jesus just did, leaving Gennesaret on the Sea of Galilee, going up into Lebanon, they would say he went up there and he stayed in the house of a dog. It was a dog. So, and the idea of dogs here is not maybe like your little puppy you have right now. It's the idea of jackals like in this picture, of hyenas, of scavengers that are wild. And they live by basically taking down live things and making them dead things and then tearing them apart. So the Jews always looked at the Gentiles as being scavengers on the earth. They weren't favored by God at all, so the only way they could get by was by scavenging. They were nasty, they were uncivilized, they were cruel. You did not want to bump up against them. These people are dogs. Stay away from them. Remember when Jesus talked about casting your pearl before swine? Right before that, he talked about not doing the same thing with dogs. Don't give those things to dogs. And he uses this word. So he's saying don't basically waste the truth on someone who's a scavenger dog in the world. Not good. However, here Jesus is going to do exactly that thing. This is interesting. He's going to introduce the gospel to a dog. Okay, that's the context. It's important to know where this woman comes from. Now, there's a gap right here, and Matthew fills in the gap. Right there. There's a gap between when she sees that he's there and when she kneels in front of him that Mark doesn't cover. So we're going to let Matthew tell us what happens in that little gap right there. I call it the Matthew gap. The Matthew gap. Huh? There he is. He's over there. He's sitting there. Okay, the Matthew gap. So let me just fill in some of Matthew right here. She came out and was crying, actually screaming. She was screaming, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." She came out and said, "Have mercy on me!" Okay, that's a little loud. But it was annoying. Did that annoy you? I won't do it again, I promise. It was annoying. Her first exposure to Jesus is to be screaming at him over and over again. She says, "Have mercy on me." But look at what she says. "O Lord, Son of David." Son of David. Well, anyone who knows the terms for the Messiah knows that Son of David is an unequivocal term for the Messiah. But she's a dog. Why would she believe this, let alone how did she know this? "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David." She calls him the Messiah at a time in the apostles' growth that they're still in the dialogue, in the narrative. They're still not exactly sure who Jesus is, believe it or not. All the things that we have seen in Mark so far, they're still going, well, yes. But she gets it. So she comes running out, and I think from the apostles' perspective, very presumptively calling Jesus the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, the King of the Jews Messiah, Son of David. "O Lord," that Lord term basically means great authority. So the greatest authority, "O Lord," great authority. So you, the great authority, the Messiah, the son of David, the promised one to the Jews, even though I'm a Canaanite, I'm a Syrophoenician. And then she has the gall to actually ask for his mercy. Why in the world would a woman who ethnically comes from the oldest enemies of Israel presume that the King of the Jews would have mercy on her? When it wasn't that long ago when Joshua came in and they tried to eradicate all these people. Why would she ever think that she would have any kind of audience with them? It's astonishing. That's why I love this woman so much. There's more in Matthew. It says that after she said that, he didn't answer her a word. I mean, it's like she says this, have mercy on me, O Lord, son of David. She's persistent. She's loud. And his response is nothing. Nothing. Not even a word. Nothing. Now, if you are in her shoes, you're thinking, well, maybe this is, I'm getting what my ancestors put me in this place of. I mean, it's a right response. I mean, who am I to think that he should have any mercy on me? Who am I to think that he even will talk with me if he's the Messiah? He's the King of the Jews, and I'm a dog. So the first response from Jesus would tend to reinforce her ethnic idea that she's not welcome here. O Lord, son of David, have mercy on me. And his response is nothing. So what does she do? Do you pick up on the body language and say, oh, well, never mind, and slink away? No. This is why I love this lady. But his disciples came, adding to the conflict, and begged him, saying, send her away, for she's crying out after us. So they're really ticked off, right? And she's persistent about this. And so presumptively, she's persistently asking over and over, and Jesus is persistently not reacting. And this is going on, and the apostles are saying, Jesus, stop this. This is craziness. She's bugging us. Do something and send her away. In fact, the way this is written grammatically, it basically they're saying, do what she asks and send her away. Just do it. Just do it and send her away. What is this all about? So they're really frustrated. They're really frustrated. She is almost at pest level in terms of the annoyance. When you look at this phrase from the apostles, it tells us from a human perspective that she was being a gigantic annoyance. It was irritating. And they said, just do it, Jesus. We've seen you do it, and get her out of our hair. This is crazy. Their patience is run out. Now, again, when she hears the apostles say this, what's she thinking? You always got to put yourself in their shoes. Well, on the one hand, if she's picking up the nuance that they're basically pressuring Jesus to do what she asked just because she's being so persistent, then she might start feeling like there's some hope. Well, maybe because I'm being such a pest and the apostles are bringing pressure on Jesus, then he'll do it for me. So she could be thinking that. She could also be thinking about the fact that maybe Jesus is not going to, and if the apostles have lost their patience with me, maybe Jesus has lost his patience with me, and everyone in the crowd, not just Jesus, is saying, go away. So there could be the peer pressure. It could be either one of those. But she's standing there wondering what to do next. Well, before we move on in the dialogue, it says she fell down at his feet. Mark leaves out a really nice touch of what Matthew says right at the part where he comes to their feet. Matthew says right here, when she did that, she said, Lord, help me. Now, what's the big deal about that? It's a big deal. There's a lot. I mean, it's just 3 words. But it's a really big deal because, for one thing, she doesn't say, Lord, help my daughter. As a parent, that's what I would say. That would be my last appeal if I'm going to get run off. But she says, no, Lord, help me. So the affliction of her daughter is an affliction for her. She has this wonderful heart for her daughter. And so she's saying, help me. But this also, for me, is the prototype best prayer you can ever pray when you don't know exactly how to pray. if it's your last gasp chance, if there's nothing else you can do, and you turn your eyes toward heaven and your eloquence is gone and everything is falling flat, you can always say, Lord, help me. It's the best short prayer you can ever do. And I think this is so short because she realizes that this is like the end of the conversation. The apostles are against me. Looks like Jesus is against me. I'll put in my last prayer, and my last and most eloquent but shortest prayer is, Lord, help me. And she's kneeling in front of him. Why would she ever think the King of the Jews would do this for the long-term oldest enemies of Israel? Isn't the King of the Jews the Messiah? Isn't he supposed to come in and bring justice? Isn't he supposed to take all the wrongs and make them right? Isn't he the one who actually is going to establish this time where all the enemies of Israel will be vanquished? If indeed this Messiah is the Messiah who will bring political and military peace through his power, then I haven't got a hope. What in the world am I doing kneeling in front of this man who's going to bring power and justice to someone like me who has been a nagging side on the side of Israel? Why would I ever think, in the face of all the justice, the issues of my ancestors, why would I ever think he's going to deal well with me? It's so backwards. Why? When we get to heaven, I'm going to ask her a lot of questions. And that's going to be one of them. Why did you persist? You had no standing. You had no place in the Jews. You have no place with the Messiah. Why would you do this? I love this woman. Sure wish I knew her name. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Yeah, okay. And he said to her, finally, and I'm going to pick up from Matthew again. He said to her, look, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Is he pushing her away? After all this silent treatment, after all this irritating screaming from her, he finally turns to her, and the first thing he says is, I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I'm not in Israel right now. I'm in Lebanon. I'm in the Phoenician coast. I'm not with my people right now. So I was sent to them. It sounds like an excuse right off the top. So what does she do? She's had every opportunity so far to be discouraged in her approach to Jesus. And now Jesus is giving her another reason to be discouraged. Well, you know this story. He's kind of pulling out of her sense of faith in him. He's seeing what the dimension of her faith is. He's playing hard to get. I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel, which that phrase right there helps us understand the next phrase that Mark and Matthew both record, and it's this. Let the children be fed first, for it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So the nation of Israel is the children, right? He's the Messiah, right? And he's saying the benefit that I bring should go first and foremost to the children. That's the nation of Israel. I'm sent to them, just like he said. It should not be wasted on dogs. Well, we heard him say this once before. However, you don't see it in the passage here, but when you look at that word dogs, it's slightly modified. This is where it's kind of fun to do a little Greek study if you want to. The dogs that he talked about before, they're hyena jackals. But this, he takes that same word for the hyena, jackal, wild dogs, and he adds the suffix eon on the end of it. Anytime you put eon on the end of a word, it makes it diminutive, makes it small, makes it little, right? When Jesus says your burdens are light, he took the word for burden and put eon on the end of it. It's a light burden. Here, he takes the word for dog, puts an eon on it, and it's a little dog. It's a puppy. It's a pet. So in this interesting turn of Greek, he has let her know that although my people consider you dogs, I consider you a beloved puppy. His love is starting to peek out. Right there. Right there. Even though I should not be giving my food to the puppies under the table, because I should give it first to my children. His love is just peeking out. Right there. And he's still playing kind of hard to get. And then, oh my gosh, drum roll. She answers him, yes, Lord, yeah. Yet even the puppies under the table eat the children's crumbs. I just love this woman. I just love this woman. Because she's absolutely right. She's absolutely right. The benefits from the Messiah, King of the Jews, comes first to Israel, but doesn't stop with Israel. It actually goes to the Gentiles. After all, here's the King of the Jews in Gentile area. And so she can actually just take the fact that he's physically here as some kind of acknowledgement of the Gentiles. Maybe he's here for the Gentiles. Okay, this is my chance. I'll go talk to him. And then he says, it's only for Israelites. Children, not the dogs under the table. But she understands something really critical, that the blessings of the Messiah will not stop with just Israel. It actually flows out to the Gentiles. Somehow she knew this. We don't know how she knew this. And she knew it well enough to persist in following after Jesus and asking for his mercy. How? We don't know. That's my question I'm going to ask her in heaven. How did you know all this? And not just knowledge, but she knew it enough to actually trust that when she came and made a pest of herself, he would respond positively to her rather than negatively. And then he calls her a puppy, a pet, a family pet. And still, when food is hard to generate in the Middle East at the time, it takes a lot of work to grow your grain, to break it down, to make bread out of it. It's a lot. So when food actually gets put on the table, that's very costly to you. It's very costly to you. So you don't take pieces of that and just go chucking it to the puppies in the house. You give it to the kids first. But what if some of it falls on the ground? Is it wrong for the dogs to eat it? No. And that's what she's getting at. And that's what we're seeing right here. And somehow she understands that it would be presumptive for her to put herself in the place of the children of Israel. But she also knew that the crumbs were still good for the dogs. You see the humility of her heart? She stayed under the table, but she understood that there was still blessings from the King of the Jews. Now, through this entire interchange, I would have loved to have had a camera on the apostles' faces. I mean, really. Because like I said before, and you see the narrative, they are not exactly sure who Jesus is. But she is enough that against all odds, she's pursuing him for his mercy and his blessings. I mean, much, much more than they have figured out, she has figured out, and she's acting on it. I'm sure, even in this interchange right here, their faces are like what you see at a tennis match. It's like this, because she has this snappy comeback, which illustrates that she has an extraordinarily mature idea of who the Messiah is. And I think their jaws just drop. Like when she says that, so Jesus, what are you going to do? I mean, is she in or is she out? Is she within the realm of your mercy or is she outside your realm of mercy? I mean, after all, she's a dog. The Canaanites are horrible people. They sacrifice their children. She's from one of them. She's one of them. She's one of them. She's a them. She's not an us. But it looks like Jesus is showing her some love, just in that little word right there, dogs. And he said to her, for this statement, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter. Wow. Mark leaves out a wonderful comment. Right here when Mark says, for this statement, that snappy comeback about the crumbs, for this statement, Matthew fills that in a little bit for us, because he says, in addition, Jesus says, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." She has been the single most useful tutor to me about what faith is, this woman. Because right here, Jesus points out her faith and doesn't just say faith. He says, in Greek, megas, faith. You know what mega means, right? He says she has mega faith. She has mega faith. Jesus has said this about no one, about mega faith, except, remember that centurion who came to Jesus and said, heal my servant, And then after that all happens, and Jesus says, I'll come to your house. No, you don't have to come to your house, because you can just say the words, and it'll happen, and the centurion goes, wow, this is just like in the army with the Romans. Someone in high power can say something and it just happens, and you're like that too. And then Jesus says, hey, I haven't seen faith like this anywhere in Israel. And he was a Gentile, enemy of Rome. And now he comes up to Lebanon, and he points to this woman and says, Megas faith. Megas faith. So in the entirety of the New Testament, everything we have written about what Jesus said about faith, two people in the entirety of the narratives he points to as having exemplary faith, the centurion and her, a Canaanite Syrophoenician woman, an enemy of Israel. She has not just a little faith, she has great faith. In fact, the contrast with what Jesus has been saying about faith in this section of the Gospels, almost every time the word faith has come up to this point, he's used the little qualifier word in front of faith, little. How can you have such little faith? Remember that, the storm? The food. How can you have such a little faith? It's always little faith, little faith, little faith, little faith. And then here we have megas faith. From a Gentile, Canaanite, Syrophoenician woman. Violated all the rules. That's why I love this woman. She knows what she knows. She's going to pursue him while he's in town. And this is what happens. Great is your faith. We're going to talk about how this is talking about faith in just a second, but we'll just finish the story. And she went home, found the child lying in bed, and the demon was gone. Yeah, faith. Now, it causes us to recall so many times where Jesus has been doing healings, and he would always say after the healing happens, well, it's because of your faith. It's because of your faith. Well, it's because of your faith. Right? He says that all the time. But what does faith have to do with that? In fact, when he goes back to his hometown, to Nazareth, it says, he couldn't do many healings because there wasn't much faith. Remember that? So what does faith have to do with this? What is faith all about in this entire process? And why is it that her faith, her megas faith, was so pivotal in this entire thing happening? And why did it break every bound of propriety about how the Jews are supposed to deal with the dogs in the world? Faith changed that. Faith changed it. So how does that work? Okay, this is how it works. When we talk about mega faith, big faith, we can always go to her and the centurion both and say, if you want to understand what faith is, look at what they did. Look at what they believed. Look at how their faith functioned in that context. And take notes, and see what's there. And so I'll just start with what my long-standing definition, this is just Jim's definition, there's lots of definitions. Now, faith is a confident expectation based upon the identity and character of God. Faith always has an object, and that's God. I always say, do you trust so-and-so? Well, yeah, I do trust so-and-so because I know about their character. I know about their integrity. When they say they're going to do this, they're going to do that. So I have faith, which is like a way of expecting what's going to happen in the future is going to happen, but it's all pivotal on their identity and their character. This is the same with God. Faith in God, your faith is proportional to the degree you understand his identity and understand his character. So is he trustable? Well, I don't know. Tell me something about God. And that's why we read the word, because we can find out who God is because of that. Our faith grows in proportion to how we understand God. Paul says faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So the degree to which you understand who God is, his identity and his character, through what we read in the word of God, it gives us an understanding about whether God is trustable. Is God trustable? And if he is, we put our trust in him. The word faith comes most primitively from an idea of being persuaded. I have been persuaded that this is true. Persuaded about what? Persuaded about who God is. So if I am persuaded about who God is, I can take the risky step of putting my trust in him because he's trustable. Every time in the Old Testament, especially in the Psalms, when it says God is faithful, did you ever think that was kind of odd? I thought we were supposed to be faithful. It says God is faithful. What does that mean? It means he's good to his word. When he says it, it'll happen. God is faithful. That's what we're talking about. Is he trustable? Is he faithful? Yes, he is. How much do you know about that? Enough to trust my life to him. And in fact, this will become very important in the next week as we look further in the gospel. So that's that. So in a short form version, I say this. Faith is an informed trust. Faith is an informed trust. Now, if I switch back to the modern context for a second, there's this stupid conflict between science and faith. Science and faith. And from the secular scientific perspective, they look at people who have faith as being kind of rubes in many respects. Like they don't understand the science behind what they're seeing, so they just claim that God did it. So their faith is really because they don't understand how the world works, and so they just invoke God as being the source of this thing. So scientists will always say, I have science and facts. Religious people have faith and no facts. Now that's a false construct. That's totally wrong. Because biblically, faith is informed. Informed about what? Informed about the character of God. Informed about his nature. Informed about his faithfulness. And we put our trust in him, that whole process of knowing and trusting his faith. So from a secular perspective, it's very hard to get away from the science versus faith kind of thing. And when you get in some of the better debates on this, and I love a lot of these debates, you'll see the scientists make that case. They'll say, well, you Christians, you're kind of rubes. You just don't get science. If you got science, you wouldn't need faith anymore because you can understand the way things work. However, when you flip and go on the other side of the coin and you talk to someone who's a Christian who has faith, who's also a scientist, that's me actually, and someone who knows science, they'll say, no, you don't understand. The more I see about the workings of creation and what's in science, and I understand the science, I see the hand of God in designing it. That's the argument of intelligent design. Intelligent design. And I could go through a page of things from science that have served to really convict me about the fact that God really is there. And from what? From science. We could talk about all the constants that have to be within 1% tolerances for life to even exist in the universe, let alone on Earth. One of them being how close you are to the sun. Gee, isn't it fortunate that we happen to be this close to the sun? Not too much farther? Not too much closer? Wow, aren't we lucky? No, that's by God's design. And that's just one of hundreds of arguments in terms of how the creation is in such a place that we are really, really lucky that all 100 of these kind of line up. Yeah, it's not looking like luck after a while. It's looking kind of like design. It really does look kind of like design. Yeah. So faith is an informed faith. And so in this particular case, it's an informed trust. I'm informed about the nature of God. And so I trust. It's an informed thing. Did she have this? Well, look at what she knows about the identity and character of God. Even though she's a classic enemy of the Jews and should be a classic enemy of the King of Kings, she said, "O Lord," that's a statement of supreme authority, Son of David, that's a statement of the Messiah, the King of the Jews. She knows who he is, and she knows everything that goes in that package. She also said, "Have mercy on me." Why would she ever think that the King of the Jews would have mercy on a Gentile? Because she knows about the King of the Jews. Maybe she knows about the fact that through Abraham, God said all the nations will be blessed, not just the Jews. And when he says that, Paul amplifies that and says, he's talking about the Messiah that's going to come from the Jews, who will bless the nations. Somehow she knows this. See, she's informed about the character and the identity of God. She knows there's mercy in who this God is. Also, she persists in saying, even the dogs eat the crumbs. That is, you're right. I am not from the nation of the Jews. It would be presumptive for me to think that I am, but I also know that the mercy of God to non-Jews exists. And so in her humility, she says, I'll just take what falls from the table. Now, why would she think that the King of the Jews would have that kind of mercy? I mean, really. Because she understood the character and nature of the God of the Jews. She knew this. She was informed. Faith came by hearing. Somehow she heard about the King of the Jews, about the God of Israel, and she said, if I ever have a chance to talk to him, I'll just engage what I know about him, and I'll ask for his mercy, because that's the way he's made. By the way, one of my favorite passages on this is right here in Exodus. In Exodus, when God and the Jews are coming to a contract time the second time, God says, here's my contract to you, Jews. Here's my contract. This is God's contract to Israel. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, the authority, is in charge. A God, oh, there it is. merciful and gracious and slow to anger, abounding in chesed and steadfast love and faithfulness. Look, there it is, faithfulness. It's right there. Keeping steadfast love, chesed, that's the devoted love, keeping steadfast love for thousands. And that word actually implies more than Israel. Steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. Is that not an astonishing statement? This is an Exodus, not Romans. This is Exodus. Yeah. Well, if you know that this is the God of Israel, then when his King of Kings, the King of the Jews, the Messiah comes, you are fully expectant that this will be his character. And so even though she knows she's a Canaanite, she's a Syrophoenician, she's a Gentile, she would be presumptive to presume that anything's coming her way, she still understands that God is merciful. And the breadth of his mercy is as wide as all the nations. Abraham and you, all the nations will be blessed. And somehow, she had it figured out. So she knew that if she persisted with Jesus, regardless of all the negative signs, regardless of the apostles saying send her away, regardless of Jesus giving her the silent treatment, regardless of the fact that he says, I'm sent to the children of Israel, woo! Regardless of all that stuff, she knows this. And so she persists. Now, there's a word to us in this. How well do you know God? How well do you know him, in fact, to be able to persist through the hard things in your life and even through the facts about your sinfulness? Are you willing to persist as much as she persisted? Are you willing to say, I'm still not hearing back. I'm still getting a silent treatment from God. I pray about these things, but you know what? I'm going to still my heart because I know that God's merciful and he's gracious. And I'll just bring this to him again. I mean, Jesus makes the same argument. You need to pray about these things and persist in these things because your earthly fathers or earthly judges, if you bug them enough, eventually they give in. And those are sinful people. How much more will a righteous God listen to your prayers? So just keep praying. She kept praying. She kept appealing. She kept coming to him against all the circumstances that looked like they were stacked up against her, including Jesus himself trying to tease out so we could see her faith. Silent treatment. Children of Israel. Mega faith. I knew it was in there. See what he's doing? And he's taught me 2,000 years later because of her. Okay, so what did she know in her mega faith? Did she have a confident expectation? Did she have a trust in what he was going to do? Well, you see it. There it is. She heard of him and she came. She heard, she's out there. While he's trying to hide. Do you know what it's like when someone busts in to your world when you're trying to hide? When you're trying to do a little R&R? Hey, honey, just turn off the lights and they won't know we're here. He could have, from a human perspective, be tempted to just be really irritated. Because he'd had some pretty busy times in northern Galilee. Pretty busy. And here he is trying to hide. And she says, I'm going. I don't care where he's hiding. I'm just going to go. Even if the doors are locked and the shades are pulled, I'm going. Here we go. She persisted. That she had this expectation that if she did this, there would be a response. Even when he didn't answer her a word, even when he was giving her the silent treatment, she persisted. She had this confident expectation. She had a trust in who he was as God in the flesh, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. She had this expectation. It shows in everything she does. Even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs, she says. That's a statement of rational, humble expectation. She didn't expect more than crumbs, right? But there are crumbs. I'm just here for the crumbs. By the way, that should always be the hallmark of our attitude with God. God, I'm not here to presume upon you. Even though I can give you all these ideas about how I think you can bless me, I'll just take what you give me, and that's okay. Because you're merciful and you're faithful. No presumptiveness. There's a lot of presumptiveness in poor Christianity today. In the terms of people saying, now this is heresy. I'm not preaching this. This is heresy. Where people will say, all you need to do is say it and it'll happen. Well, that's a little presumptive. Unless God promised it. Now, if God promised it, I think you're on good ground. But if God didn't promise it, then it's presumptive. It's presumptive. I have enough faith to believe that it'll happen. I just have to say it and it'll happen. Well, unless God said it, not you said it, then it's presumptive. There's a humility that has to be in place when we come to God. Say, God, I know you've promised me abundant life, and I can pray that far, but what that means in my life, I'll just leave that up to you. I'm humble about how you translate that into my life. Even events that we classically would put on the bad side of the ledger rather than the good side of the ledger, struggles you go through, many times unjust treatment by people who prejudge who you are. Even those negative things, God has a remarkable way of turning into great good for you. So in the midst of those things where we say, well, that's not a blessing, it is a blessing. So God allows things that you don't even know to pray about to be a blessing to you. God, take this away from me. I hate being in the midst of this. And God's going, but you know, on the outside of that, when you get through it, it'll be really good for you. I mean, you're going to get some incredible benefit from this. Yeah, but it's pretty darn uncomfortable right now. Well, I know, and I'm with you, and I'm walking you through it. Well, I'm going to pray against this because, God, I think this is just wrong. It's unjust. Well, yeah, I know it's unjust. Just hang in there. Stay under it. There's good things through this. So we pray the wrong things in terms of what's for our good. That's why I say you need to be humble when you pray and say, well, God, not my will, but your will be done. I know that you love me. I know that you're faithful. I know that you're gracious. I know that you're merciful. I know that you are engaged for my good. So, God, in the midst of this thing I'm going through right now, help me. See, that's how it works. I love her. I love her. I just love her. Okay, we're going to leave her behind, and we'll come back in a second. I want to finish the last two scenes before we run out of time. 31. Okay, so he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. So this picture I've rotated. I hope you're not too disoriented. We're hovering over the Mediterranean Sea. We're looking toward the southeast in this picture, toward the southeast. So he took this white road. He came all the way up to this coastal region, classic Phoenician region right here. And now he's going to move. He's going to move context, and he's going to go somewhere else. And the question of the hour before we move him is, well, Jesus, did you do anything else up there? You spent 2 days walking there, 2 days walking there. And all you did was talk to a Syrophoenician woman? That's it? And I would argue, because of the benefit that's come for me from this story, I'd say that was enough. That was enough for me. And we have no clue either about her influence in that region of Phoenician Lebanon today. We don't know. However, did you know that Lebanon in the Middle East had been classically the most Christian per capita in the Middle East for generations and generations? Only recently has it not been that. Most Christians in Lebanon have had to flee. But if you were going to pick the most Christian place to go in the Middle East, you would go to Lebanon. Was it because of her? I don't know. I'd like to think that. Okay, so he's in this region somewhere here between Tyre and Sidon. It says he goes through Sidon, which is this little yellow thing down here. You probably can't read the words. And then he goes to the Sea of Galilee, which is in the middle here. And then he's going to go to the Decapolis. So watch the line here. He's going to go from this region. He's going to go inland into this wonderful fertile valley right here, the Hula Valley. Goes to that side of the Sea of Galilee and goes to the Decapolis. Decapolis is over there. That's where the Gentiles live. That's Gentile. Everything on that side of the Jordan is Gentile space. So we've just been on the Phoenician coast in Lebanon. That's Gentile space. And then he comes back around through the Hula Valley that's north of the Sea of Galilee. Yeah, Hula like Hawaii. Don't make fun of it. But it's the Hula Valley. And then he comes and he goes around the side of the Sea of Galilee. And then he goes into Decapolis, which is everything on the eastern side of the Jordan River. He goes from Gentile area to Gentile area. And what most of us never realize when we're reading through the Gospels is that Jesus started his biggest ministry in the north, in the Jewish Sea of Galilee area, and did a lot of stuff, including the feeding of the 5,000 in the Jewish region of the north. And now, with him going to Lebanon with her and what happens next, he's doing a huge tour in the Gentile areas. So what happens here, starting with her, is a Gentile ministry of Jesus. There's the northern Jewish ministry, and there's the northern Gentile ministry. And most people don't realize that. And that's what he's doing right now. So he goes down there to the region of Decapolis, which literally means, in Latin, 10 cities. Or maybe that's Greek. That's Greek, actually. Okay. They brought him to a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. Clicker's not working. And taking him aside from the crowd privately. So Jesus is going to do something, but not with everyone watching. Oh, that's interesting. Why? I don't know. But he takes him out of the crowd, and he put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, he touched his tongue, and looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Not a big deal. I mean, we've seen a lot of healings as he's done his ministries in the north. Well, why is this highlighted? Because this is a Gentile. That's why. This is a Gentile. Whoa. And there's another little nice touch right here before we leave him, because it's an interesting thing. Two touches. He looks to heaven and he sighs. Have you ever wondered about that? He does this. But it's more than that. I shouldn't have done that. The word sigh here is the same word that the word straight, which means tight, the straight gate, the narrow. This is a narrowed vocal thing is what it's implying. So it's like going like this. That's the tight throat. Everywhere else it's mentioned in the New Testament, the word's translated groan. Tight neck, like that. So what's he doing when he looks up to heaven and goes, oh. We're supposed to understand something like that because we're humans too. Well, what does it mean when Jesus does this and goes, oh, and groans? Don't know exactly, but I'll give you my guess, and maybe you got a good guess too. I think this is Jesus grieving to a certain degree about what sin has done to creation, to men. He looks to God and goes, oh. I think he looks at this man who can't hear and can't speak. His ability to communicate is radically diminished from everyone else. And he looks up to God and goes, oh. I think he's realizing the isolation this man has had because of this fallen creation. He's realizing the marginalization that's happened throughout his life. He's realizing the frustration he's gone through with not being able to say what he wants to say and hear what he needs to hear. I mean, he's literally an outcast from the knowledge community. And he looks up to God and goes, oh. I think he's empathizing with the man. It's such a human comment right there. You don't see that anywhere else. You see Jesus looking up to heaven, but you never hear him groan when he does it. If that's true, then when Jesus sees the problems in your life, I always envision Jesus looking up to heaven and going, oh. Not only the things that bug us, short-term things, but even in the sins that we are deceived into willingly participate in and that end up hurting us in the long run. And then we come to Jesus and we say, help me. And he goes, oh. Now, it's not a sigh that says he's disappointed in us. It's a sigh that grieves with us about the devastation of sin. That's what I see when I see those two words right there. He looked up to heaven and he groaned. And then he uses an Aramaic term, Ephatha. And Mark knows we don't speak Aramaic anymore. So I put in that little thing to translate for us. It means be open. But even that itself is a fascinating thing because Aramaic, although it was the generic spoken language with the Jews, it was only a minor language with the Gentiles, especially in Decapolis. I mean, that's heavy-duty Gentile area. However, he's not, Aramaic is Hebrew-derived. If you spoke Hebrew, you could get most of it, Like if you spoke Yiddish today, you could get most of it if you also spoke German, because it's a German-Hebrew mix. Aramaic's kind of like that as well. Well, he's also using a word from Aramaic that's really, really old. It's older It's older than Hebrew in a way. It's Chaldean. It comes from Babylon. So he's using a Babylon-derived term to a person who's dominated by Babylon culture and ethnicity. Oh, he's actually speaking Gentile. Ancient Gentile. That's what's interesting about that. So he used, that's a really touching kind of a touching phrase right there. Be open. He could have said it in Greek, which would be the predominant world language at the time. That's the international language. Very informal though, not really nice. Aramaic was the street talk, but here he's trying to get back toward the street talk of this guy's ethnical background. It's a nice touch. Again, he does. Ephphatha. And Mark thought it was important enough for us to know that because it really is a nice twist. Okay, he's healed. And Jesus charged them to tell no one. Now, in the past, Jesus did this. You remember this. You know, when he was doing his big ministries, he would tell people, with the Jews, don't tell anybody. But remember when he went across the lake and we went over and he found the guy, the Gentile who had the legion of demons? Remember that? He tells him, don't go back across the lake with us. You stay here and you tell everyone over here. Where was he? Decapolis. So he's been spreading the word in the Decapolis area of the Gentiles ever since Jesus rid him of the legion of demons. So he's been telling everybody. So it was okay then. Why is it not okay now? Well, because Jesus' fame has grown exponentially. And so even though these people are still on the eastern side of the Jordan, that is isolated from the Jews on the western side of the Jordan, still, if they talk too much about it because of the intermixing that's starting to happen between the two sides, the rumors about who Jesus is starting to grow so much on the eastern side, it's going to leak to the western side. Jesus is saying, yeah, don't spread it. You're going to speed up the timeline too much. They're going to know who I am. I'm going to get in trouble faster. I'm not going to make it to Passover for the crucifixion. It's going to happen way ahead of that. So he's telling him to slow down. So he tells him now, as opposed to the legion guy, tell no one. So how'd that work out? But the more he charges them, the more zealously they proclaim it. Because for the Gentiles, this is a big deal. This is the first time Jesus has been doing stuff in the Gentiles, with the exception of the legion guy. I mean, this is big news. I mean, we read this because we've been going through Mark, or you go through Matthew. You say, well, he's been doing this everywhere he's been going. He's been feeding people. He's been healing people. What's the big deal? These guys are acting like they've never seen it before because they've never seen it before. You allow them a first-time gasp because they wanted to tell everybody. They were astonished beyond measure, saying he's done all things well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. And you can't make big enough what that phrase beyond measure is. They are just totally blown away. Now, if you were a Jew in northern Galilee, it wouldn't be common, but you would have heard about it and you'd hear things going on. For them, it's like, I cannot believe my eyes. This is the Gentiles, just blown away. These are Gentiles. Let's go to scene 3. More Gentile action. So in those days, when again a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat, dun, dun, dun. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. He called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd because they've been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they'll faint on their way home. I mean, they've come a long way. Some of them come from very far away. Huh? Sound familiar? Should sound familiar to the apostles, but it's not familiar to the Gentiles because they've never seen this happen. Watch out. Watch out. And his disciples answered him, well, how can we feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? Head slapper. Didn't you guys see the 5,000? What's the problem? Is it red yet? I'm done. How can we feed these people with bread in this desolate place? Now, by the way, they don't bring up the option of buying bread, which happened with the 5,000, because it's so desolate, there's no place to even buy bread. We're talking Decapolis, and if you've seen Decapolis, present-day Jordan, if you're not close to the Jordan River in the nation of Jordan, it's desolate. It's very desolate. In fact, to this very day, the vast majority, somewhere over 90% of all the food grown that Jordanians eat comes out of the Jordan River Valley. You go further east, forget it. There's nowhere to grow. So they're in a desolate place. Desolate place. So he asked them, well, how many loaves do you have? And last time it was 5. this time it's 7. So this is how we know this is a different event. This is not the same event. This is a different event. But it's happening in the Gentile region. That's what makes it so astonishing. It's so astonishing. We've got 7. And right there, one of the very perceptive apostles should have said, I know what to do now. No, they don't. That's how I would have written it. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground, which, by the way, when you tell them to sit down on the ground, that lights an expectation. He took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them, gave them to his disciples, set before the people, and they set them before the crowd. So I'm being a little unfair. The apostles might have said, we know what to do. Mark just doesn't record it, because Mark doesn't record everything. But the same thing happens. They've got 7 loaves, and they distribute them to the people. Huh. Wow. Must not have been many people. 7 loaves. Well, and they had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. By the way, when it says fish, it's almost always cooked. Did you know that? It's cooked fish. It's not raw fish that they carry with them. It's usually cooked fish. So cooked fish, they didn't look like this. Those are mackerels, by the way. So they didn't look, yeah, okay. And they ate and were satisfied. Another word for full. Full. You want some more? Another helping? Oh, I'm satisfied. I'm full. Can't do it. That's the Thanksgiving word when you eat too much turkey. Oh, no. Pumpkin pie? Well, maybe, yeah. They were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. 7 baskets full. Not 12 this time. That's kind of interesting. We don't know what that means. However, again, if you're kind of a word nerd and you look up that word basket, this is the Gentile word for basket, not the Jewish word for basket. And they were different. The Jewish baskets were kind of tall and had like a narrowed neck on the top, skinny and tall. The Gentile baskets were flat, kind of shallow. So they brought back Gentile baskets, 7 of them, full of stuff. And they were about, 4,000 people. They were about 4,000 people. And he sent them away, and immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. We're going to close with that. But so here we have this feeding of the 4,000. You always talk about the feeding of the 5,000. If someone asks you, what's the difference between those two? Well, the number is different. But the 5,000 were Jews. The 4,000 were Gentiles. So in a really visible way, Jesus is saying, I'm going to set a table for you. Everyone be seated. And I'm going to feed you. And the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the King of the Jews, not only feeds the Jews until they're satisfied, but he feeds the Gentiles until they're satisfied. Not only does the King of the Jews heal people, his Jews, but he also heals Gentiles. There's no better way for us to understand that Jesus was for the Gentiles as much as he was for the Jews. There's an order, though. The Jews first and then the Gentiles. And Paul even says that in his opening letters, to the Jew first and also the Gentiles. I mean, it's a propriety about where the good news comes first. It comes to the Jews. They should get it because they've got the Old Testament. Eventually, they didn't get it that well because of the Old Testament. And so Paul himself says, well, then I'm going to go off and give it to the Gentiles. I gave it to the Jews first. Now we're going to the Gentiles. But the blessing of the King of the Jews isn't just to the Jews. It's to the world. Abraham, in you, all the nation will be blessed. All the nations. Okay, so we're going to leave that behind and we're going to move again. So where is he going to go now? Remember, he just went on a gigantic tour. Let's just recap a little bit where he's traveled today. So here we are. We're looking to the northeast now. There's the Sea of Galilee. Took this road, went all the way up to the region of Tyre and Sidon over here. And then after that, he went down to Decapolis. So it says he went through Sidon. So wherever he was on the coast, he went up to Sidon, which is this little yellow pip right here. And from there, he goes down that Central Valley, goes around the edge of the Sea of Galilee, goes out to the Decapolis, which is Gentile Central. That's where he's gone. So now where's he going? Well, it says he took a boat. So he's not taking a boat out here. Dalmanutha is another name for Magdala. And if you remember the clock face on the Sea of Galilee, Magdala is at 9 o'clock. Gennesaret, where the White Road starts from, is at 10 o'clock. So it's going to be just quite close to there. So he comes back from Decapolis, he goes there, gets on a boat, and then goes to Magdala. So that's what he does. That's what he does. But most importantly, you can't really read that. Sorry about that. He's in the region of the Jews again. So he's finishing his Gentile circuit. Finishing his Gentile circuit. And in his Gentile circuit, not only did he preach to them about who he was, he also healed anyone who would come to him. He did that even to a woman, a Canaanite woman way up on the Lebanese coast. Anyone who come to him, he'd heal. And then he also fed them just like he did fed the 5,000. So this is Jesus' parallel ministry, telegraphing to everybody the King of the Jews is not just for the Jews, it's for the Gentiles. But now, coming back to Magdala, he's solidly in Jewish territory. And do you remember what was happening when he was just north of there in Gennesaret before he went on the right road? Do you remember what was going on in Gennesaret? Remember the hassle he was having in Gennesaret? That's when the Pharisees came up and said, let's talk about the traditions of the elders. That's what was going on in Gennesaret. And now he's right next to it in Magdala. Probably not Magdala proper, the region around Magdala. That's why the region around Magdala is more generally called Dalmanutha. But he gets to there. So now he's back in the territory where the Jews are. And more importantly, he's back in the territory where the Pharisees are, who would not follow him on that tour because it would make them unclean to do it. So you know what happens next week as we come back to Mark? Pharisees. He left the Pharisees on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. He comes back to the western shore. Boom, he's back to the Pharisees. And guess what? From this point on in the gospel, he'll turn his face to the south to go to Jerusalem, and his entanglements with the Pharisees will get worse and worse and worse. He no longer can avoid them. He goes going right into the hornet's nest in Jerusalem, and eventually he'll be killed as a result. Up until this point, he's been staying pretty distant, but now he's back in it. He hits Magdala, he turns south, and the gospel literally says he turned his face toward Jerusalem. And in about 5 to 6 months' time from here, he'll be crucified. Wow. Okay, to finish today, I want to read this, I sing this song because there's a little bit of that woman in the story right here. You see it? She wasn't presumptive. We come to this, your table, but we don't presume that we are right or worthy to sit and dine with you. Perhaps of your abundance, we'll gather up the crumbs. And then coming back to the prodigal son, or we'll be your hired servants, not daughters or your sons. It's a wonderful graciousness and understanding of the mercy of God. Grace is when he gives to you what you do not deserve and you cannot earn. And for this woman, this Syrophoenician woman, she came not asking in a presumptive voice, but she says, I can't earn it, I don't deserve it, but I know you're merciful. Maybe the crumbs that fall from your table. And Jesus said, bingo. Hey, everyone, megas faith, right there, right there. Okay, let's pray. Father, thank you for including this passage. She blesses my heart every time I see her. And Lord, every time I see her, I wonder if I would have been so persistent. If I would have been so tenacious about your mercy and your grace and your faithfulness. She held on until all she had, the only thing she had was you, and that was enough. Silent treatment, abuse from the apostles, ethnic outsider, and yet she clung to your mercy. Lord, we came and clung to your mercy when we came to you. We know we didn't deserve it. We know that ethnically we came from the sinful opponents of you. And Paul says that even while we were yet sinning, Christ died for you. And in all of that, somehow we came to understand the same thing she did. And Lord, we understand that you're the source of our faith. You're the one that gives us that understanding about your mercy. You're the one that implants in our heart an ability to trust based on our knowledge of who you are. And we are so grateful for your mercy. We are so grateful for your character of grace that gives to us, despite our history, despite our background. And despite whether we're a favorite ethnic group like the Jews or not, you look at us, and instead of calling us dogs, you call us puppies, beloved, cherished companions. Lord, she has changed my life. So thank you for bringing Jesus on such a long detour by foot in order to bring her to us today, here, 2,000 years later, thousands of miles away. She illustrates for me what faith is all about. And you have created that faith in us. We love you and we trust you as a result, and pray that those around us will come to understand the gracious God who we have come to love and come to trust. Because not only our minds, but our hearts are convinced that you're dedicated to our good. So thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.